Hello everyone, welcome back to Rare Japanese Sounds, and today we have what I think is a pretty interesting topic, because we're going to take and try and answer a pretty simple question. Should you buy for $50? Now that may seem like a pretty easy question to answer, but as you'll see, when we actually go ahead and answer it, we'll discover a lot of things about record rarity, how it's connected to its price, and whether or not you should actually buy an album like for $50. But first of all, I would like to thank you all for the feedback that you gave me on the previous video, and particularly those of you who didn't completely agree with what I had to say. Of course, when you're dealing with a topic that is as touchy as finance of a collectible hobby, it's normal to have some clash of opinions. But at the end of the day, you gotta acknowledge that there are people out there who are not seeing the hobby as just something to spend a little money on, but actually go and spend serious money. And you can't really collect with any kind of seriousness a hobby like music or any other collectible without knowing that there are people out there who are spending a lot of money with investment in mind. Anyway, on to today's topic. Should I really need to introduce for you? It's probably one of the most popular CD pop albums of all time. And what's for sure is it's the most wanted Japanese release of all time on Discogs. So with a pedigree like that, you should expect the release to come at a pretty steep price, especially when looking at the price of the others on the top 5. But actually, $50 is not that much. It's something that you can spend with a reasonable budget. And as you can see on Discogs, more people have a copy of For You than most other popular CD pop albums. But come to think of it, when you look at the release page of For You on Discogs, you can see that a lot more people have a copy of it than most other Japanese CD pop or any other genre releases out there. So how come? Well, to answer that question, we need to take things to the most basic level we can. And that's by saying that price is always a function of offer and demand. But in the case of music, and by music I mean albums that were released in the past and are not available anymore, at least not in their original release, the current offer is actually something that was defined by demand back then. So we have an equilibrium not between offer and demand right now, but more like between demand now and demand back then. And demand back then is just how popular the album was. But of course, there's a catch, and it is that people can only spend a fixed amount of money on music in a given month. There has always been less popular music than unpopular music. That's why we have phenomena like CD pop suddenly becoming massively famous and CD pop albums becoming expensive because they belong to that small subset of music that was unpopular back then and popular now, only thanks to special circumstances like the YouTube algorithm. As you can see on the figure next to me, and of course those are not real figures, just to illustrate, but it's easy to understand that most music never becomes popular. And above that, if music becomes popular now, it's more likely than not that the music was already popular back then. And that is simply because good music is more likely to become popular than bad music. Anyway, I also would like to give those 4 examples of albums that fit into each of those 4 subcategories. And most albums that go into the bottom left, unpopular back then, unpopular now, are all the albums nobody's almost ever heard of because they're not particularly good, or because they might belong in the top left category and just haven't been rediscovered yet. Now, the bottom right category is the one we're most likely to encounter on the internet or in record shops, and that's because they compose most of the volume of music in general. There are those albums that sold really well, and that's why you see them a lot in record shops, for instance. But also because music is very rarely becoming more popular now than back then. It's just really unlikely to become even more popular now, and that would be the only way for those albums to gain more value. Now in the top right corner, you actually have the albums that did have a fair bit of popularity back then, but managed to still be popular right now. And that is the rare category to which For You belongs to, because For You wasn't a very obscure album back then, but we're going to get back on that topic later. And finally, in the top left corner, you have the rarest of them all, albums that were completely ignored back then, but are now extremely desired and looked after. And those are mostly albums belonging to genres that don't have a lot of sales volume, like ambient and all that. So I said that For You was popular back when it released, but just how popular? Well, if my sources are not wrong, then For You was the top selling album on the week it first came out, and I think one of the top best-selling albums of the year 1982 in Japan. That represents hundreds of thousands of copies sold in just 1 year. Of course, the album being popular at the time of release is a good point when it comes to popularity now, because people know the name, they might have it in their collection somewhere. It's a good point in terms of that, but it also means that there are a lot of copies that exist out there in old people's collection, simply. Just picture hundreds of thousands of old Japanese people with a copy of For You in their cellar or something, and they realize that this random old album is suddenly worth $50, $100, and imagine them selling their copy on Yahoo Auctions. That would probably shake the price, wouldn't it? So let's try and see how the rise in popularity of For You has impacted the number of sales on Yahoo Auctions over the last 5 years, and for how much those sales ended. And to have a referential comparison, we're going to take my boy from last time, Orient, and see how much For You and Orient differ from each other in terms of number of sales and in terms of price. So as we can see on the graph, Orient is way more expensive than For You, but its price hasn't risen too much in the last 5 years, whereas For You has gone from what was essentially a $5 bargain album to more than $50 for a clean copy. And that shows a lot about the concurrent popularity of those two albums. Now, if the fact that For You has seen its price multiplied by 10 over a period of 5 years isn't enough to convince you that something is up, you can just look at the number of sales realized for those same two albums over the same period. And no, it's not an error. The number of sales For You is actually hundreds of times more than for Orient, which should be pretty alarming when you have an album that goes at a spectacular rate of increase in price multiplied by 10 in 5 years is way more than any typical investment. And over the same period of time, the supply that was already massive 5 years ago still doubling should be pretty concerning to those of you who are considering to buy the album for $50. Because for the price to keep increasing past that point, you need to have a consistent demand from people still wanting to buy the album at an increased price over and over, despite the hundreds of albums sold per year. And at the same time, you take Orient, only 3 sales per year on average, and the price has barely been multiplied by 2 or not even. Whereas even just a slight uptick in demand would make the album skyrocket in price, just because there are so few of them that any small movement could have a huge impact. Now, of course, you can see those same figures differently, and you can see them in a positive way for you. You can say that, well, it's true, the price is increasing and the supply too, but it also shows that there is a huge amount of people who are willing to buy For You for $50 consistently hundreds of times a year, whereas you don't have that same guarantee for Orient with only a few sales a year, and you really have no idea what the actual price is. With For You, you know exactly what the price is at, and you know that there are people willing to pay for it. And then there is the question of reissues, which actually goes in favor of For You, because in the case of Orient, or any album that has very limited supply, anytime there is a reissue, it will be at least comparable in size to the original, so it will be adding a lot of supply to the market. On the other hand, with For You, you already have hundreds of thousands of copies. So if there is at any time a reissue, it's probably going to be something like a special limited edition reissue. Actually, it has already been the case with popular albums like Rarity, so you can be pretty sure that a special reissue is coming for you at some point, but the supply is going to be so small that it's not going to affect the original at all, even just in terms of supply and demand. Whereas for Orient, of course, as I said last time, reissues don't necessarily impact the price of the original, especially when you're paying for the premium of having such a rare original. But still, it's something to be taken into account. So in the end, should you buy For You for $50? Well, my answer is, if you only care about the music and just having the original album, listening to it on a vinyl record, then my answer is always going to be just buy it and don't worry about the finance aspect of that. If you're a bit wary about spending $50 for something you're not guaranteed to see conserving its value, well, you can have a certain satisfaction of knowing that the price is not going to be moving very fast because of just the huge supply and the huge demand at the same time. You're guaranteed to be seeing the price decrease slowly or increase relatively slowly, and that's a good guarantee to have that you maybe wouldn't have with a more expensive album. And for instance, if you spend the same amount of money on a clean copy of For You or on a small little beat up copy of Dream Cruise, in the end it's not really spending the same kind of money. With For You, you're kind of buying the blue chip of city pop, something you're pretty sure that will be always valuable to some people just because of, one, the historical value of being a very popular album back then, but also its historical value as a central piece of modern resurgence of city pop. On the other hand, if you're not in such a rush to have a copy of For You, you can be pretty sure that the price isn't going to move that quickly, so you don't need to fear missing out on the album or finding it for a good price. So you will always have more opportunities to find it, whereas an album with a smaller supply, like Dream Cruise, for a similar budget, might be something you need to be on the lookout for more actively. Anyway, those were my 2 cents, but this channel is mostly about discussion, so let us know, would you buy For You for $50? Would you not? And why? That would be interesting to see how people react to the same data in different ways. This was Rare Japanese Sounds, and as always, until next time, stay tuned.